Some of the music I used in this video was kindly donated by The Bogs Official. He's another YouTuber and his channel is amazing. Definitely go over there and check it out. Drop him a subscribe and tell him J Nightmare sent you. This isn't my story, but one I heard from a member of my caving club. This story is distressing, but I think it serves a purpose, so please hear me out. In Iwate Prefecture, there are numerous caves. Back when this story takes place, it wasn't as touristy as it is today, so many of the caves lay unmapped and partially unexplored, because internal surveys weren't often conducted. Back then, survey events were held within the caving community, and this story concerns a very large cave survey on a winter's day. Participants broke up into groups, with the more experienced members of the club trying to map and investigate the cave. There were areas which had already been mapped, and some of the caving club members grew a bit bored of measuring areas of the cave. They were just wandering around at their own pace. They were more interested in taking photos and looking for wildlife. This wasn't a good idea. I guess this is why we are told this cautionary tale when we join the club. One of the cave explorers decided to crawl down a narrow opening in the cave. The others in the club knew based on the survey that there was nothing but a dead end, so initially they weren't concerned. Unfortunately, that changed quickly. We all knew he would go in, find nothing, and probably squirm his way back out backwards, since it was incredibly narrow. But after a few minutes passed, he didn't come back out. We all gathered around and began to panic. We looked at the tiny crevasse he managed to crawl into, and then someone in the club asked aloud, "Is there enough room to turn around in there?" Another chimed in with what we were all thinking. Did he get stuck? There was a sober silence, which was broken by the sound of someone shuffling. He came back out of the crevasse. I cannot tell you how relieved I was to see him. Something was wrong though. He looked jaded and frightened. Not only that, he didn't come out backwards. He came out facing everyone, which we were all sure was impossible. Then he began to mumble about what had just happened in that narrow crevasse. I got to the dead end, but there was something more. There was an even narrower hole. For some reason I poked at it and discovered that the earth beneath the hole could be moved aside. After working at this for a while, I managed to get the hole wide enough to fit both my arms in there. Then my whole body. It opened up into a reasonably wide chamber. That's how he was able to turn around. He went on. I thought that I had found an undiscovered part of the cave, and I was really excited. I shone my torch all over the cave, and my torchlight fell on something. A doll, I thought, or maybe a mannequin. It was lying on the cave floor, backed into a corner. I had heard of seeing things in caves, stalagmites which appear to look like humans, as well as odd formations of mud on the cave floor. I was aware that my eyes could play tricks on me in the dark too, but none of this accounted for the fact that this human-shaped mass was wearing glasses. So you think it was human? Someone asked. He nodded silently. The caving club left and called the police. Later, the body was identified. According to the police, it was the body of a high school student who went missing a few years ago. He entered the cave with candles and some sweets, so we can establish that he had intent to explore. But for what purpose? Some speculate it was because he wanted to commit suicide. Others say that he just wanted to explore. Perhaps it was his own little secret base. Due to this portion of the cave almost completely shut off, his body had been preserved from the elements. The only issue was muddy water from above had dripped onto the body. One strange thing was, the glasses didn't have a drop of muddy water on them. If you have never been in a cave with no light source, perhaps I can help you imagine what it's like. I've been in caves where I've turned the torch off just for a second. It was so dark I couldn't tell whether my eyes were open or shut. I tried to stay in the dark as long as possible. The longest I could manage was about a minute. I think the everyday, ordinary person could keep their sense of balance for about 10 minutes. After that, you wouldn't know up from down. Then, the mind wanders. The things in the dark, they can tolerate it, but man can't. The sounds, the loss of direction, it all adds up. It all takes a toll. The poor high school boy must have lasted about 30 minutes or so without panic in there. I'm assuming that there was some sort of cave-in which buried the only exit. Then things would have gotten worse. When his matches got wet. Or perhaps he couldn't find where he left the candles. At this point, he would have regretted his decision to enter the cave, as there would be no one to hear his whimpers or screams for help. He would be cursing himself time and time again for coming or for not bringing a torch. Maybe even wishing he told someone where he was going. How many times did he trace his hands along the wall, looking for the exit, back and forth, back and forth? How many days did he live? What kind of hallucinations did he see? Unsure if he was awake or asleep, hallucinating or thinking straight. Hunger or thirst, one of those must have come for him towards the end. But not before his mind tormented him further. Maybe he didn't even truly feel like himself towards the end. Maybe his identity faded into the darkness. How many times did he scream, scratch the walls, cry? He would have died without even realizing he was alive or dead. Staring, backed into the corner, hiding from whatever was tormenting him, his glasses resting on his nose, pointing towards the exit he could no longer find. I think this is the most terrifying and tragic death I've ever heard. There is a cave on the outskirts of my mountain town. For as long as I can remember, we were told to never go near it. A good friend and I decided to ignore this advice, and we went to explore the cave. I know we sound like idiots. We didn't bring any gear besides a torch, and we didn't really ask why we shouldn't go into the cave. For all we knew, a bear could have been in there, or it could have been close to collapse. I can think of numerous terrible things which could have happened to us, but what actually happened, I could have never predicted. The cave in question is deep in the mountains. I would prefer not to reveal its locality to anyone as brave or dumb as we were, for reasons which will become apparent very shortly. The entrance to the cave was surrounded by a wire mesh. It didn't seem like we were going to get in. Then my friend found a weak point. He pulled on the chain link fencing, and before long, we had our way in. We didn't hesitate, we just shuffled in. The cave was wide and long, it looked very deep. It sort of sloped as you went in. Now if you imagine you're walking in a swimming pool towards the deep end, it was like that. With no more than a few steps into the cave, we were plunged into complete darkness. My friend flicked on his torch. We were walking deeper into the cave, and shining the torch all around and chatting as we did so, until my friend noticed something lying on the cave floor. It looked like a lump of hair. Since my friend and I were young, we thought it was one of the soot creatures from Spirited Away or My Neighbor Totoro. We thought we had found something magical and pure, but that was very far from the truth. We were laughing and cheering about how we had just proven these creatures' existence. Then my friend ran over and grabbed it. He held it in the palm of his hand. His facial expression changed as he manipulated it in his hand. From the lump of hair, teeth emerged. It dawned on us that this was a clump of hair from a person's head, as well as teeth. Teeth that were definitely human. We both just simultaneously screamed, and my friend launched the hair at the cave wall. Then we heard some laughter echoing from the cave. It sounded distorted, like it had been recorded or something, I guess. It's really hard to say when you're that frightened. Still, I knew it as the recognizable laughter of children. It echoed from deep within the cave. A moment passed, and it sounded as if it was approaching. We bolted back to the wire mesh entrance. I cut my fingers as I scrabbled to move my body through the gap we had created. As soon as we escaped, we didn't stop running. I looked back at the cave as we made a break for it, and I swear that I saw a dark figure pressed up against the chain link fencing. Now it's decades later, and you still wouldn't find me anywhere near that cave. I'm still friends with the guy I went exploring with, and he very much feels the same. There was something inherently evil about that place. I had heard some horrific stories from the past which might explain something about the cave, or at the very least, be of interest. After devastating floods, caves such as this were used to offer up a human sacrifice to prevent further floods. Believers would throw someone in, bound, and when the water level rose, the gods would claim their offering. In most cases, I heard, the offerings were children. As I mentioned, the cave was deep. I imagine all the water from a flood would collect at the bottom of it. I have heard that the cave is no longer accessible, and there is now a shrine there. It wasn't supposed to be accessible when we were young either, but we got in. I have read online that people who have heard about the atrocities of long ago go there to offer their prayers for the victims. My friend and I really should go. Okay, so there have been a lot of responses asking me to give the location of the cave out. I said I wouldn't and I won't, but I will tell you that the cave is in a mountain range of Gifu Prefecture. I heard this story from my grandmother. During the war, it was quite common for children to be sent from cities to families in the countryside. Sometimes this would be your own family. Other times you might get sent to live with complete strangers. The hope was sending the children to these remote locations so that it would save them from airstrikes, generally remove them from the areas of conflict, and give them a better lease on life. Often in the mountains, villagers would excavate areas into the mountains to create makeshift air raid shelters. That's what my grandmother said anyway. On the outskirts of the village, in a dense mountain forest, was a cave. My grandmother heard of this cave, and she decided that it would be her air raid shelter, if the worst should happen. She spoke with her friend in the village, and she agreed to help my grandmother check out the cave and see if they needed to clear it up or make further excavations. The cave was incredibly dark and cool. It provided some respite from the heat of summer, but it needed some work to make it big enough to house more members of the village. People from the village pitched in to make this happen. A few days after work began in the cave, strange and unexplainable things began to happen in the village. The friend my grandmother had been working with vanished. She was a young woman, and she really didn't have any reason to run from the village. It was very distressing for my grandmother, especially since my grandmother said she managed to disappear within the cave. They entered together, but only my grandmother came out of the cave. No one in the village had seen the young woman. It was only a small mountain village, so she was sure that someone would have noticed her leaving. The village was full of older men and women. There were single women, wives, and children. All able-bodied males were sent off to the war, so everyone knew everyone, and they were all looking out for one another. No one could think of a reason she would have to leave. It felt very weird, but they had to keep working in the cave. Not long after, the second person disappeared. She was older than my grandmother's friend. Then the third disappeared, also a woman. When the third went missing, talk of going to work in the cave in the woods dwindled away. Some people in the village believed that the people who entered the cave were laying a curse of some description upon themselves. That fact wasn't true for my grandmother, though. The cave was considered a bad omen, and the villagers didn't go near it. I asked my grandmother about it some more, and she said she used to hear stories about the cave when she was younger. Something about men trying to hunt something which lived in there, and how it was one with the shadows, some kind of apex predator. There is a lot of missing people stories in the mountains, even to this day. It just makes me wonder, what's lurking out there, in these remote areas? She said that after the war, people didn't like to go near the cave in the woods, even during the daytime, especially women. Shortly after the war, all the evacuees pulled from the villages, so my grandmother has no idea if the cave is still there to this day, or if the missing people ever returned. This happened about 2 years back. It all started when I went on a solo mountain climbing trip in Tohoku. I started my climb at roughly 8 a.m. I made it to the summit of the mountain by 12. It only took about half the time I went up to get back down, so I was left with some free time on my hands. I decided to take in the scenery. I headed down a road around the cliff face. It was a refreshing change from the mountain trail I had spent the morning on. I had read online that a lot of people pick their own vegetables from this area, so I thought I'd give that a shot, take a wee keepsake back home with me. So I was foraging around deep into the cliff face forest, getting some good stuff and enjoying the scenery. I found plenty of wild mushrooms and a lot of interesting plants. Then, up ahead, I saw a dark black shadow about 30 meters away. I got closer and realized it was the entrance to a cave. I was curious, so I stumbled through the bushes towards it. On closer inspection, it was incredibly dark, but plenty wide for entering. I had my mountain hiking headlamp with me, and I'd been caving a couple of times, so I thought, why not? It was pretty cool discovering a cave. Here in Japan, if you discover one, you get to name it, and if a new large cave was discovered, it would be national news. So with those thoughts on my mind, I went in. I didn't want to tell anyone about it since I didn't want anyone to claim it for their own. I really felt as if this was an undiscovered cave, and I had to check it myself. The cave floor was rough and ragged and littered with puddles. It was big and surprisingly wide. It opened out into different areas. It was big enough to stand up in too. So I wouldn't get lost, I dropped some of my vegetables as makeshift markers, Hansel and Gretel style, in the hope that I would easily be able to find my way back to the entrance. After about 20 minutes of walking around in there, I met a dead end. Well, not a dead end actually. There was a hole, 2 meters wide, enough to squeeze my body through. I was sure I could get through there, easily, and continue exploring the cave. However, I didn't have the courage to enter the hole. Fears of claustrophobia and the idea of being trapped, alone in the dark, were insurmountable. Instead, I shone my torch inside. I saw that after about a meter or so, it opened up again. I could see stalagmites on the cave floor. I panned along the ground with my headlight and saw something humanoid in shape. I'll never forget the moment my eyes landed on it. It looked like a mound of hardened mud at first, but it wasn't. It was humanoid. It had long limbs, dark, hardened, mud-like skin, and tiny eyes. The eyes, they looked useless. It was thin, and it looked as if it was bigger than a human. It was only partially visible, but the second I saw it, I let out an involuntary scream. It was just lying there motionless between the stalagmites. I turned my head away almost instantly, and, as if in response, I heard something groan from that chamber. It didn't sound normal. It was some inhuman grunt. Things weren't normal in the cave, and I had to get out. I needed to get out. I ran for it. Some innate instinct told me to flee, and as I did, I barely kept myself stable. I weaved in and out of puddles and around rocks. I heard the flutter of bats behind me as I ran. Beneath the flapping of wings was the definite, inhuman groan I had heard moments ago. Except this time, I heard footfall. It sounded like someone, or something, was running. I tripped and skinned my knees. I got to my feet as soon as I could, and I just kept running. I saw the light of the exit of the cave up ahead as the bats flew past me overhead. The sun was setting when I got out. I kept running towards the ridge, and then I climbed down. It was 7:30 when I arrived at the parking lot below. Thankfully, there were some people around. I asked them for help. My leg was in agony from my trip in the cave, and my knees were covered in blood. An older gentleman drove me to the nearest hospital, and I was immensely grateful. The wounds on my legs were deeper than I realized. The man who drove me to the hospital stayed with me until midnight and invited me to join his caving club meeting. So I did. I told them about what I had seen in the cave, and they theorized the following. The growling sound I heard was probably made by the echo of the bat wings. They told me that seeing humanoid-shaped masses in caves is entirely normal. It's a conditioned response to the darkness for all humans to find shapes which the mind can easily recognize. Caves discovered on the mountain will be named after the person who discovered it. They were all interested in checking out the cave, and so was I, since I might be attaching my name to it. A few days later, and I was invited to go back to the cave with the group to check it out. My injuries hadn't healed, so I declined. I heard from the group that they went in search of the cave, but they were unable to locate it. After several failed expeditions, they called me again to double-check the location, and eventually they persuaded me to come back to show them the way to the cave myself. I couldn't believe that they couldn't find it, and I started to wonder if I had hallucinated the whole thing. I quickly understood when I got there the reason why this bunch of caving enthusiasts couldn't find the cave. It turned out they weren't the best map readers. The thicket outside was more overgrown now. It gave me the chills to be back there. I could see that thing in my mind's eye. We all stood in front of it. There were about 10 of the caving club members in attendance. I still believed that I saw something humanoid on the cave floor. There was an atmosphere outside the cave which was unexplainable. The leader of the caving club said, "Come on. You'll look in the chamber, and it'll be nothing but a disappointment. Trust me, we're going to light the place up for you too," he said as he tapped his torch. Everyone was armed with a torch, and it made me a bit less anxious to go in. Plus, I'd realized I'd look pretty dumb if I didn't go in. I mean, what was I going to do? Just sit outside waiting for them? Once inside, thanks to the torches, the whole cave was completely illuminated. It didn't seem as daunting anymore. I could see more of the cave now. I was surprised to see less rocks and debris on the ground, and equally surprised to learn that the cave ascended and descended in areas. All 10 of us went in, and sadly, I couldn't see any trace of the humanoid creature I'd seen. It took us about 30 minutes to scour the entire cave and reach the point where I saw it. One of the caving club guys wasted no time and attempted to climb through. He said that there was about a 4-meter drop on the other side of the opening, so it was just as well that something scared me off. If I might have been braver, I might have fallen and been trapped in the darkness alone. One thing I noticed was that the stalagmites had been broken, as if some path had been created. I must have looked totally mad to the caving club members. And the truth is, I felt a bit foolish. It all seemed so real though. They seemed happy enough. They wanted to come back with climbing gear and explore the place. I didn't want to be a part of that though. I mentioned that my Hansel and Gretel wild vegetable trail was nowhere to be seen, but I guess some animal could have got them. A few weeks pass and someone from the caving club calls. They investigated the other chamber. They said that they found a pile of strange things in there. Climbing gear, watches, bones, clothes, and a pile of vegetables which had begun to rot. Something was in there. Probably still is. I don't ever want to go back. Just a reminder, I'm planning on doing a mega compilation for reaching 1K subs. Thank you all for watching, commenting, liking, sharing, and subscribing. This has been brilliant. And not only to go with the mega compilation, which is going to take me hours to translate, because I plan on putting a higher number out than I usually do. And I plan on inviting some pretty cool guests as well. So not only that, I wanted to add a little Q&A session. And I know nobody may want to ask me anything, but it's fun sometimes. I can stop using my spooky voice and try and branch out a bit. So I have a couple of questions, but if you have anything you want to ask, please just drop it below. Remember, more stories are coming soon. Sorry it takes a long time to find the stories. It's just you have to read them in the source language, then translate them. Thank you for watching. And as always, I'll see you in the comments.